In 2024, three black SUVs rolled into the tiny town of Redwood Creek, Alabama. The kind of vehicles nobody there had ever seen before. The kind that cost more than most houses sitting along Main Street. People stopped what they were doing. Store owners stepped out onto sidewalks. Neighbors came onto porches. Children pointed as the convoy moved slowly through town. By noon, nearly 800 people had gathered in the town square. Television cameras from Birmingham stood beside a wooden stage decorated with white flowers. And standing on that stage was a 65-year-old black woman named Loretta Hayes. Her hands trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. 20 years earlier, she had taken in 3 orphaned white boys nobody wanted. 3 brothers rejected by foster families. 3 boys abandoned by relatives. She had raised them with almost nothing. No money. No influence. No promises of a better future. Only faith. Only sacrifice. Only love. Then one day, they were taken away from her. And for 20 years, she never saw them again. Not once. But today was different because those 3 boys had come back. What Loretta didn't know was that the frightened children she once tucked into bed had become some of the most powerful men in the South. And what they were about to do would leave the entire town speechless. But to understand that day, we have to go back. Back to 2004. Back to the moment everything began. Redwood Creek, Alabama, wasn't the kind of town people moved to. It was the kind of town people stayed in because they couldn't afford to leave. Population, 2,900. 1 grocery store, 1 gas station, 1 church, 1 traffic light that blinked yellow after midnight. Everybody knew everybody, and everybody had an opinion about everybody else. Loretta Hayes lived on the edge of town, in a weathered white house built by her grandmother in 1956. The paint peeled from the porch railings. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The kitchen floor creaked beneath every step, but it was home. Loretta was 45 years old, never married, no children. Not because she didn't want them. Life had simply taken a different path. 2 miscarriages in her 30s had quietly buried her dream of becoming a mother. She never talked about it, never complained, never let anyone see how much it hurt. Instead, she poured her love into everyone else. The children at church, the elderly neighbors who needed groceries, the stray animals that wandered onto her property. Every morning before sunrise, she worked in the cafeteria at Redwood Elementary School. Every weekend, she cleaned offices inside the Redwood County Courthouse. Together, the jobs paid just enough to survive. Barely. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table studying a repair estimate. The roofing company wanted $3,600. Loretta had less than $900 in savings. Outside, rainwater dripped steadily into buckets positioned throughout the living room. Drip. 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 She folded the estimate and placed it beside a stack of unpaid bills. Then she walked into the living room. Above the fireplace hung a wooden plaque, carved by her grandmother decades earlier. The words were faded but still readable. A house becomes a home when it holds someone else's pain. Loretta looked at it every day. Tonight she stared a little longer. The house felt unusually quiet. Too quiet. Sometimes, silence could feel heavier than noise. She lowered herself into her grandmother's rocking chair and closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered softly, "if there's somebody out there who needs me, send them my way." A few minutes later, the telephone rang. Loretta opened her eyes. The call would change her life forever. And by the time the sun rose again, 3 boys nobody wanted would be on their way to her door. Loretta lifted the phone to her ear. "Hello? Loretta?" a tired voice asked. She immediately recognized it. "Judith Mercer?" "Yeah," the woman replied. "I'm sorry to call so late." Loretta glanced at the clock. 9:17 p.m. "Everything okay?" A long silence followed. "No," Judith said softly. "Not really." Loretta sat straighter. Judith had worked as a county social worker for nearly 20 years. She didn't call people unless something was wrong. "I have 3 boys," Judith said. Loretta frowned. "Brothers." The silence deepened. "Nobody will take them." Loretta's heart tightened. What happened? "They've been through 4 foster homes in less than 2 years." 4? Yes. Judith sounded exhausted. The last placement ended yesterday. Loretta waited. The family asked for them to be removed immediately. Why? Another pause. Because they said the boys were too damaged. The word struck Loretta hard. Damaged. As if children could be broken appliances. As if pain made someone disposable. How old are they? The oldest is 14. His name is Mason. Judith took a breath. Then Wyatt, 11. And the youngest? Eli. How old? 8. Loretta stared across the room at her grandmother's plaque. A house becomes a home when it holds someone else's pain. What happened to their parents? Car accident. Loretta closed her eyes. When? 8 months ago. And there's no family? Judith hesitated. There may be distant relatives somewhere. We haven't found anyone willing to take responsibility. The answer felt incomplete, but Loretta could hear the desperation in Judith's voice. If I don't place them by Friday, Judith continued, the state will separate them. Loretta's stomach dropped. Separate them? 3 different facilities. The thought made her sick. 3 grieving brothers. 3 frightened children. Alone. Again. Without giving herself time to overthink, Loretta spoke. Bring them. What? Bring them here. Judith went silent. Loretta, this is a lot. I know. You've never fostered before. I know. You barely have enough room. Loretta looked around the small house. Then she smiled sadly. I've got 3 empty bedrooms. The next 3 days felt strangely unreal. Loretta cleaned every room. She repaired loose cabinet doors. She washed old curtains. She bought second-hand beds from a church donation center. The money should have gone toward fixing her roof. Instead, she spent it on blankets, pillows, school supplies. On Friday afternoon, a county van pulled into the driveway. Loretta stood on the porch. Her hands trembled. The door opened. The first boy stepped out. Tall, thin, watchful. Mason. He looked older than 14, not because of his size, because of his eyes, the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting good things. The second boy followed, Wyatt. Lean and tense. Every muscle looked ready for a fight. Then came Eli, small, quiet, holding a battered leather notebook tightly against his chest. He never looked up, never spoke, never even glanced toward the house. Judith climbed out behind them. Each boy carried a black garbage bag. Everything they owned fit inside. Loretta felt something break inside her heart. Children should not be able to carry their entire lives in a trash bag. She stepped off the porch, walked directly toward them, then did something none of the previous foster families had done. She knelt, right there, in the driveway, eye level with Eli. Hi, she said softly. My name is Loretta. No response. That house behind me is mine. She smiled. As long as you're here, it belongs to you, too. Mason folded his arms. Wyatt looked suspicious. Eli tightened his grip on the notebook. Loretta pointed toward the front door. I only have 3 rules. The boys exchanged glances. We eat together. Silence. We tell the truth. Still silence. Then she smiled warmly. And nobody goes to bed without knowing they're loved. For the first time, Wyatt reacted. That's not a rule. Loretta chuckled. You're right. What is it? She looked at all 3 boys. A promise. Something flickered across Mason's face. Gone almost instantly, but she saw it. Hope. Tiny. Fragile. Still alive. As the boys followed her toward the house, Loretta noticed something else. The worn leather notebook in Eli's arms. Its edges were cracked with age. Gold letters were barely visible on the cover. Initials. H.A. Loretta didn't know why, but something about that notebook felt important. Very important. And somewhere, hundreds of miles away, a powerful man was about to discover exactly where those 3 boys had gone. The first few weeks were harder than Loretta expected. Not because the boys were bad, because they were hurting. And hurt children often looked angry long before they looked sad. Mason tested her constantly. He came home late from school, ignored questions, ate dinner in silence. He watched Loretta the way a soldier watched unfamiliar territory, always waiting for danger, always expecting disappointment. One Tuesday evening, He didn't come home until nearly 10 o'clock. Loretta sat alone on the porch. A plate covered with foil rested beside her. The food had gone cold twice. She reheated it twice. When Mason finally walked up the driveway, he froze. Most foster parents would have been furious. Most would have yelled, punished him, threatened him. Loretta simply stood. I was starting to worry. Mason looked away. Sorry. She picked up the plate. I made meatloaf. His stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. Loretta smiled. I figured you might be hungry. Mason stared at her. No lecture. No screaming. No punishment. Just food. Just concern. Something inside him shifted. Not much. Just enough. The next week, he came home before sunset. Wyatt was different. His pain exploded outward. In 3 months, the school called 4 times. Fighting. Arguing. Throwing punches. Every single time, Wyatt claimed somebody had insulted one of his brothers. Every single time. Loretta attended every meeting. One afternoon, Principal Patricia Langston folded her arms. Mrs. Hayes, this behavior is unacceptable. I agree, Loretta said calmly. The principal blinked. But I'd like to ask something. What? Loretta looked toward Wyatt. Has anyone asked why he's fighting? The room fell silent. Nobody had. That weekend, Loretta drove Wyatt to Redwood Youth Center. The building was old. The boxing ring was worn. But Coach Marcus Reed knew what he was doing. Wyatt crossed his arms. I don't want boxing lessons. Loretta smiled. That's okay. Then why are we here? Because you have anger. So? Because anger isn't bad. Wyatt frowned. What? It's what you do with it that matters. She pointed toward the ring. Learn to control it. For the first time, Wyatt looked interested. 3 weeks later, he was training 4 days a week. 2 months later, he stopped getting suspended. Not because he wasn't angry anymore, because he finally had somewhere to put the anger. And then there was Eli. Sweet, quiet Eli. The little boy still hadn't spoken. Not a single word. Not to teachers, not to doctors, not to Loretta. Every evening she sat beside his bed and read stories aloud. Adventure stories, fantasy stories, stories about brave children who faced impossible odds. Sometimes she wondered if he was even listening. Then one night she paused in the middle of a chapter. Immediately, Eli looked up. His eyes were focused, waiting. Loretta smiled. So he was listening. Week after week, she kept reading, never pushing, never demanding, just showing up. Then one evening in early spring, she tucked the blanket around him and stood to leave. A tiny voice stopped her. Loretta? She froze. For a moment, she thought she imagined it. Slowly, she turned around. Eli was staring at her. His small hands clutched the blanket. Will you still be here tomorrow? The question nearly shattered her heart. Loretta sat beside him, gently brushed hair from his forehead. Yes, sweetheart. His eyes filled with tears. And the next day, I'll be here. The day after that, Loretta smiled through tears. I'll be here every day you need me. Eli nodded. Then, for the first time since arriving, he smiled. A real smile. The kind children wear when they finally feel safe. By summer, the house felt different. Lighter. Fuller. Sunday dinners became tradition. The boys helped in the garden. Mason fixed broken fence posts. Wyatt carried heavy bags of soil. Eli followed Loretta everywhere with his notebook. One evening, they gathered around the kitchen table, laughing over a burned batch of cornbread. Loretta watched them, really watched them. And for the first time in years, the empty spaces inside her heart didn't feel empty anymore. They felt occupied by 3 boys who needed her. 3 boys she was beginning to love as her own. That night, after everyone was asleep, Loretta sat at the kitchen table, filling out adoption paperwork. The first page, then the second, then the third. She smiled as she wrote their names. Mason Calloway, Wyatt Calloway, Eli Calloway. She had no idea that far away, hidden behind wealth and influence, someone had just learned exactly where those boys were, and he was already making plans to take them back. By December of 2005, the Hayes house felt more like a home than it ever had before. The bedrooms that had sat empty for years were now filled with life. Shoes by the front door. School books on the kitchen table, laughter drifting through the hallway. For the first time in decades, Loretta no longer dreaded coming home to silence. The boys had changed. Mason had become protective of the family. Wyatt was thriving at the boxing gym. Eli smiled often now and spent hours writing stories in his worn leather notebook. Life wasn't perfect. Money was still tight. The roof still leaked. Some people in Redwood Creek still whispered behind Loretta's back, but none of that mattered much anymore. They had each other. Then winter arrived, and everything nearly fell apart. The storm began on a Thursday afternoon. At first, it was only freezing rain. By sunset, the roads were covered in ice. By midnight, power lines snapped across the county. The temperature dropped lower than anyone expected. The wind howled against the old house. The electricity went out just after 2 in the morning. The sudden darkness woke everyone. Mason grabbed the flashlight. Wyatt gathered blankets. Loretta lit candles throughout the house. "We'll be okay," she told them, but she wasn't entirely sure. The heater was dead. The temperature inside dropped quickly. Cold air slipped through every crack in the aging house. The tarp covering part of the roof had frozen solid. Ice formed along the inside of the windows. By dawn, everyone was shivering. Then Eli started coughing. At first it seemed harmless, just a cold. But within an hour, his condition worsened. His skin became pale. His breathing turned shallow. His body shook uncontrollably beneath the blankets. Loretta placed a hand against his forehead. He was burning with fever. Fear gripped her chest. The nearest hospital was nearly 30 minutes away. Their old sedan wouldn't start. The roads were covered in ice. Phone lines were down throughout the county. She looked at Eli, then at the storm raging outside. There wasn't really a choice. Mason. The boy looked up immediately. "Yes, ma'am?" "You stay here with your brothers." His face tightened. "What are you going to do?" "I'm getting help." "You can't walk out there." "I can." "Loretta." She placed both hands on his shoulders. "I'm coming back." Mason wanted to argue. Instead, he nodded, because for the first time in his life, he trusted someone enough to believe them. Loretta wrapped herself in her grandmother's old winter coat, pulled on gloves, covered her face with a scarf, then stepped into the storm. The cold hit like a wall. Wind screamed across the fields. Ice covered every surface. Each step felt dangerous. Twice she slipped. Twice she fell hard against the frozen ground. Twice she got back up. The quarter-mile walk to Naomi Sutton's house felt endless. Her fingers went numb, then her feet, then her face. But she kept moving, because somewhere behind her, a little boy was struggling to breathe. Finally, she reached Naomi's porch. She pounded on the door with both fists. Again. 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 The door flew open. Naomi stared in shock. "Loretta!" "Eli," Loretta gasped. "Hospital." That was all she needed to say. Within minutes, they were on the road. Naomi's truck slid more than once, but somehow they reached the emergency room. Doctors rushed Eli inside. The next hour felt like a lifetime. Loretta sat in the waiting room with Mason and Wyatt beside her. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. Finally, Dr. Andrew Keller appeared. The exhaustion on his face softened when he saw them. "He's going to be okay." The relief was overwhelming. "What happened?" Loretta asked. "Early hypothermia, mixed with a respiratory infection." The doctor paused. Another hour in that house, and things could have been much worse. Loretta closed her eyes. Thank God. Hours later, Eli woke up, weak, tired, but alive. That night, as snow fell outside the hospital windows, Mason sat beside Loretta in the waiting room. For a long time, he said nothing. Then quietly he asked, "Why did you do it?" Loretta looked at him. "Do what?" "Walk through that storm." She smiled gently. "Because you needed me." Mason lowered his head. "No one's ever done that before." The words broke her heart. Without thinking, she wrapped an arm around him. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Mason leaned against her shoulder, the way a son leans against his mother. And when he finally spoke again, his voice cracked. "Thank you." He hesitated, then said the words she would remember for the rest of her life. "Thank you, Mama Loretta." Tears filled her eyes instantly. She squeezed his hand. Neither of them noticed the man standing across the hospital parking lot, watching, waiting. A man who had spent months searching for 3 missing grandsons. A man with unlimited wealth, unlimited power, and absolutely no intention of letting them remain with Loretta Hayes. The months following the ice storm were some of the happiest Loretta Hayes had ever known. Life settled into a rhythm. Mason was thriving in school. Wyatt had become one of the best young boxers at Redwood Youth Center. Eli talked constantly now, filling the house with stories about dragons, knights, and imaginary kingdoms he wrote inside his leather notebook. The house still leaked. Money was still tight, but happiness had never depended on money. For the first time in years, Loretta felt rich. One warm Sunday evening, the 4 of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky glowed orange and gold over the garden. Wyatt tossed a baseball into the air. Eli read one of his stories aloud. Mason helped Loretta shell peas into a metal bowl. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The silence felt peaceful, comfortable, like family. Then Mason cleared his throat. "Mama Loretta?" Her heart still fluttered every time he called her that. "Yes, sweetheart?" He stared down at the peas. "Thank you." Loretta smiled. "For what?" "For staying." The simple words nearly brought tears to her eyes. She squeezed his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." None of them knew it. But someone else was already planning otherwise. 3 days later, a black sedan appeared near the end of the road. Loretta noticed it while watering tomatoes. The vehicle sat beneath an old oak tree, engine off, windows tinted, watching. The next day, it returned. Then the day after that, always the same spot, always there. Sheriff Walter Briggs dismissed her concerns. "Probably somebody lost," he said. "Folks get turned around out here all the time." Maybe he was right, maybe not. Loretta couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then came Friday, the day everything changed. She was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of an engine. Not a sedan this time, something larger, more expensive. She walked around the front of the house and froze. A black limousine sat in her driveway, the kind she'd only seen on television. Its polished exterior reflected the Alabama sun. The rear door opened slowly. An elderly man stepped out, silver hair, tailored suit, polished shoes, the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of wealth and power. A younger man followed, carrying a leather briefcase. The older man's eyes moved across the property. The peeling paint, the sagging porch, the patched roof. His expression revealed nothing, but Loretta sensed judgment. Then his gaze settled on her. "Miss Hayes, that's me." "My name is Victor Ashford." The name meant nothing to her. Not yet. "And who are you?" The man stood straighter, as though the answer should have been obvious. "I'm here for my grandsons." The words hit her like a punch. "What?" "Mason Calloway." He paused. "Wyatt Calloway." Another pause. "Eli Calloway." Loretta felt her stomach drop. "They're my daughter's children." Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Mason stepped onto the porch. The moment he saw the old man, all the color drained from his face. For several seconds, nobody moved, nobody breathed. Then Mason whispered a single word, "You." Victor looked at him calmly. "Mason." The boy's hands curled into fists. "Mom wrote to you." Silence. She wrote dozens of letters. Victor's expression remained unchanged. "You never answered." Loretta looked back and forth between them, confused, alarmed. What is he talking about? Victor ignored the question. Instead, he nodded toward the man holding the briefcase. "My attorneys have prepared the necessary documents." Loretta's pulse quickened. "What documents?" Victor finally looked directly at her. "Custody papers." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "No." The answer came instantly, without hesitation, without thought. "No." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Miss Hayes, these boys belong with family." Loretta stepped forward. "They already are with family." Something dangerous flashed across Victor's face, gone just as quickly as it appeared. The wealthy often weren't accustomed to hearing the word no, especially from people they considered insignificant. "My legal team will contact you Monday." He turned toward the limousine. "This doesn't need to be unpleasant." Mason laughed bitterly. "It already is." Victor paused. For the first time, something resembling emotion crossed his face. "Regret." "Maybe. or guilt. But if it was there, it disappeared quickly. The limousine door closed. The vehicle drove away, leaving silence behind. Loretta turned toward the boys. Eli looked terrified. Wyatt looked furious. Mason looked defeated, as though he had seen this ending long before anyone else. That night, nobody slept much. The following Monday, the papers arrived, and with them came a reality Loretta had never considered. Victor Ashford wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the richest men in the South, and he was prepared to spend whatever it took to take the boys away. For the first time since they arrived, Loretta felt truly afraid, because she wasn't about to fight a grandfather. She was about to fight a billionaire. The legal battle began 2 weeks later. Loretta had never been inside a courtroom as anything other than a cleaning employee. Now she sat at one of the front tables, staring at stacks of legal documents she barely understood. Across the room sat Victor Ashford, impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, surrounded by attorneys, 3 of them, each carrying folders thicker than telephone books. The imbalance was impossible to ignore. On one side sat a billionaire. On the other sat a woman whose roof still leaked whenever it rained. Loretta's attorney, Nathan Pierce, was only 28 years old, fresh out of law school. He lacked experience. He lacked prestige. But he possessed something the other lawyers didn't. He believed in her. The hearing began promptly at 9. The judge listened patiently as Victor's legal team presented their case. The argument was simple. Victor Ashford was the boy's biological grandfather, the only living family member who had formally come forward. He possessed unlimited financial resources, access to elite education, healthcare, security, opportunity. The attorneys painted a picture of luxury and stability. Then Nathan stood. His voice shook at first, but as he spoke, confidence grew. He told the court about the boy's transformation, about Mason's grades improving, about Wyatt's success in boxing, about Eli speaking again after months of silence. Most importantly, he spoke about love. The courtroom remained silent. Then the witnesses began. Reverend Samuel Grayson testified first. "I've known Loretta Hayes for 20 years, he said. If character matters in this courtroom, there isn't a finer person in this county." Next came Principal Patricia Langston. She described the changes she'd witnessed in the boys. Mason became a leader. Wyatt learned discipline. Eli learned to trust people again. Then Dr. Andrew Keller testified. He told the story of the ice storm, of Loretta walking through freezing conditions to save Eli's life. Several people in the courtroom wiped tears from their eyes. Even the judge appeared moved. For the first time, hope flickered inside Loretta. Maybe love mattered. Maybe the truth mattered. Then Victor's attorneys stood again, and everything changed. They didn't attack Loretta. They didn't criticize her. They simply focused on one word: blood. Again and again. Blood. Biological family. Blood. Legal rights. Blood. Inheritance. Blood. Tradition. Blood. By the end of the day, it felt like nothing else existed. Not sacrifice. Not devotion. Not the countless nights Loretta spent comforting frightened children. Only blood. The final hearing arrived 3 weeks later. The courtroom was packed. Mason sat beside Loretta. Wyatt stared at the floor. Eli clutched his leather notebook so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Nobody spoke. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then came the decision. The words felt distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. The court acknowledged Loretta's extraordinary care, acknowledged the boys' emotional attachment, acknowledged the remarkable progress they had made, but ultimately ruled in favor of Victor Ashford. Custody would transfer immediately. Immediately. The word echoed inside Loretta's mind. Immediately. The hearing ended, just like that. No dramatic speeches, no miracles. No last-minute rescue, only paperwork, signatures, and heartbreak. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered. Cameras flashed. Questions filled the air. Loretta ignored them all. Her attention remained fixed on the 3 boys standing beside her. Mason looked numb. Wyatt looked furious. Eli looked terrified. The drive home felt endless. Nobody spoke during dinner. Nobody touched the food. The silence hurt more than any argument could have. The next morning, A black limousine arrived, right on schedule. Victor Ashford believed in efficiency. The driver stepped out first, then Victor. He stood near the vehicle, waiting, as though collecting property. Loretta hated the thought. One by one, the boys came outside carrying small bags. Everything felt wrong, painfully wrong. Mason approached first. At 16, he was nearly as tall as Loretta, but in that moment, he looked like a little boy again, lost, scared. "Mama Loretta," he whispered. Tears streamed down her face. "I know, sweetheart. We don't want to go. I know. We tried. I know." Mason hugged her tightly. Neither wanted to let go. Then Wyatt stepped forward, the toughest of the three, the fighter, the boy who never cried. Yet tears poured down his face. Loretta wrapped her arms around him. "Remember what I taught you." Wyatt nodded. "Control your anger. Don't let it control you." Finally, Eli approached. He held the leather notebook against his chest. For several seconds, he simply stared at her. Then he extended it toward her. Loretta frowned. "Eli? Keep it for me." His voice trembled. She carefully accepted the notebook. "I'll come back for it." The certainty in his voice broke her heart. Loretta knelt and kissed his forehead. "I'll keep it safe. I promise." The limousine door opened. One by one, the boys climbed inside. Mason turned back one final time. His eyes locked onto hers. No tears now, only determination. "We'll find our way back." The door closed. The limousine pulled away, and Loretta Hayes stood alone in her driveway, holding a worn leather notebook, watching the people she loved disappear down the road. She didn't know it then, but 20 years would pass before she saw them again, and those 20 years would test her more than she could ever imagine. The limousine disappeared down the dusty road, leaving nothing behind except silence and a woman standing alone in front of her house. Loretta Hayes didn't move for a long time. The worn leather notebook pressed tightly against her chest felt heavier than anything she had ever carried in her life. Inside it was Eli's world, the only piece of him she had left. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. The boys' rooms were still exactly as they left them. Beds unmade, shirts folded on chairs, a baseball glove still sitting by the door. Loretta sat on Mason's bed and waited for a sound that never came. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. She wrote letters every single week. She wrote to Victor Ashford's address. Every letter came back stamped, "Return to sender." She tried calling, disconnected. She tried hiring a lawyer, too expensive. She tried visiting the city. She was turned away at the gate of a private school in Vermont, where the boys were reportedly sent. "Restricted access," the guard said. "Orders from Mr. Ashford." And just like that, she was erased from their lives, from their world, from their future. Redwood Creek slowly changed its tone toward her. At first, it was whispers, then silence, then judgment. People began to say things they didn't say when she was nearby. She must have done something wrong. No billionaire just takes kids for no reason. She probably wanted money. Loretta heard everything, but she never answered. She just kept working, cleaning floors at the courthouse, serving breakfast at the school, coming home to an empty house that still smelled like children who were no longer there. Years passed. In 2010, budget cuts removed her school job. No warning. No discussion. Just a pink slip. By 2015, her body began to break down. The doctor said cancer. She nodded quietly. No insurance meant no early treatment. So she sold what little she had. Her car. Her jewelry. Her grandmother's last ring. She went through chemotherapy alone. Naomi Sutton was the only one who drove her to appointments, the only one who held her hand when the nausea hit. But even in pain, Loretta never stopped praying. Not for herself, for them. Always for them. Then came 2020. The obituary was small. Victor Ashford, billionaire philanthropist, passed away peacefully. Loretta read it in silence, her hands trembling. 3 grandchildren survived him. Mason, Wyatt, Eli, still alive somewhere. That night, she opened Eli's notebook. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't read it. She just held it. Like a promise, like a memory that refused to die. Outside, The roof still leaked, the house still creaked, and Loretta still waited, even when there was nothing left to wait for. Part 8. The Search. When Victor Ashford died, everything changed. The empire he left behind was unimaginable. Billions of dollars, companies, properties, power stretching across the country. And buried inside that empire were 3 names: Mason Calloway, Wyatt Calloway, Eli Calloway. For the first time in years, the brothers learned the truth. Not the version Victor told them. The real truth about Loretta Hayes. About the letters she wrote. About the visits she was denied. About the woman who never stopped waiting for them. Mason read the files in silence. Wyatt broke the table in anger. Eli didn't speak at all, but he held his notebook tighter than ever. That night, Mason made a decision. "Find her," he said. Wyatt nodded. Eli whispered, "She kept her promise." They hired the best investigators in the country. Money no longer mattered. Time no longer mattered. Only one thing mattered: finding Loretta Hayes. But Loretta had no traceable life. No social media. No credit history worth tracking. No digital footprint. Just a small house in a forgotten town. And time was running out for that house. By 2023, foreclosure papers arrived. Loretta sat at her kitchen table, counting $147 in her account. The bank gave her 30 days. 30 days before everything she had left would be taken away. She didn't cry. She just placed Eli's notebook on the table and whispered into the empty room, "I kept my promise." Far away, an investigator finally found a match. Redwood Creek, Alabama. A faded address. A house still standing. Still waiting. And 3 men who had once been boys finally knew where to go. They didn't hesitate. They got in the cars that same night and drove toward the only home that had ever mattered, toward Loretta Hayes. The world moved on after that day at the courthouse, but Loretta Hayes did not. For her, time didn't move forward. It simply stretched and bled. Every week, she wrote letters to Mason, to Wyatt, to Eli. She wrote even when she knew no one would read them. Every letter was returned. Returned to sender. Returned to sender. Returned to sender. Then the phone numbers stopped working. Then the addresses disappeared. Then even hope became something she had to carry carefully, because it hurt too much to hold. Redwood Creek slowly turned its back on her. Not all at once, but piece by piece. First the whispers, then the silence, then the judgment. People stopped greeting her at the grocery store, stopped sitting near her at church, stopped looking her in the eyes. She must have done something wrong, they said. No rich man just takes children for no reason. She probably lost them because she deserved it. Loretta heard everything, but she never defended herself. She just kept working. Cleaning floors at the courthouse, serving trays in the school cafeteria, coming home to a house that no longer sounded like a home, only echo. Years passed like that, slow, heavy, unforgiving. In 2010, budget cuts ended her school job. No warning, just a letter. In 2015, her body began to fail her. A hospital visit confirmed what she already feared: cancer. She nodded quietly when the doctor spoke. No insurance, no savings, no safety net. She sold her car, then her jewelry, then her grandmother's ring. She went through chemotherapy alone. Naomi Sutton was the only one who stayed close enough to help. But even in pain, Loretta never stopped doing one thing: praying. Not for herself, for them. Always for them. Mason, Wyatt, Eli. Every night, every tear, every breath. Then in 2020, the news arrived like a distant storm. Victor Ashford had died. A short obituary in a newspaper. That was all. Loretta read it 3 times, her hands shaking, and beneath the name, one line: survived by 3 grandchildren. Mason Calloway, Wyatt Calloway, Eli Calloway. Alive. Somewhere. Still alive. That night, she opened Eli's leather notebook for the first time in years. The pages smelled like dust and memory. She didn't read it. She just held it and cried quietly into the empty kitchen. Far away, across the country, something was happening. The inheritance process had begun, and the truth about Loretta Hayes was finally surfacing. Victor had hidden everything, every letter, every attempt she made to reach them, every truth he didn't want them to know. When Mason finally saw the files, he didn't speak for an entire day. Wyatt broke a chair in silence. Eli didn't move at all. Then Mason said one sentence: "Find her." No hesitation, no doubt, just direction. Money stopped mattering. Distance stopped mattering. Only one thing mattered now: finding Loretta Hayes. But she had no traceable life left. No digital footprint. No social media. No modern identity. Just an old house in a forgotten town. And a woman who had been waiting far too long. By 2023, the house was close to being lost. Foreclosure papers arrived quietly, like everything else that had hurt her. Loretta sat at the kitchen table that night, counting $147 in her account. The bank had given her 30 days. 30 days before the home she built her life around would be taken away. She placed Eli's notebook in front of her, her fingers resting on its worn cover. "I kept my promise," she whispered into the silence. Outside, the roof still leaked. Inside, she waited, not knowing that the search had finally ended, and that 3 men were already driving through the night, heading back to the only place that had ever felt like home. The road into Redwood Creek felt different after 20 years. For Mason Calloway, it looked smaller than he remembered. For Wyatt, it looked harsher. For Eli, it felt like stepping back into a life that had never truly left him. 3 black SUVs moved slowly through the town at dawn. People began noticing almost immediately. Curtains shifted, doors opened, whispers spread faster than the engines rolling through the quiet streets. Who are they? Are they celebrities? Government? No one knew. But everyone felt something was about to happen. The vehicles turned onto a familiar road, a road that had once been nothing more than dirt and memory. And then Mason saw it. The house. Small, old, weathered, still standing, just barely. His breath caught. Wyatt leaned forward in his seat. Eli stopped breathing entirely. "That's it," Mason said quietly. No one needed to ask what it meant. The cars stopped. Silence fell instantly. One by one, the doors opened. Mason stepped out first. He was no longer a boy. He was a man shaped by years of discipline and responsibility. Wyatt followed, stronger now, his body built from years of controlled anger and focus. Then Eli stepped out last. He looked fragile for a moment, until his hand tightened around the leather notebook, the same notebook he had carried through everything. The house door creaked open before they even reached the porch. And there she was, Loretta Hayes, older now, tired in ways time had carved into her face, but still standing, still real, still waiting. For a second, no one moved, no one spoke. Then Eli whispered, "Mama Loretta." That was all it took. Loretta's hand flew to her mouth. "No." Her voice broke instantly. "It can't be." Mason took one step forward. "We came back," he said. His voice cracked under the weight of 20 years. "We promised." Loretta stumbled off the porch. She didn't care about her knees. She didn't care about her age. She ran. And Mason caught her first, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid time might steal her again. Wyatt joined them seconds later, gripping tightly, tears breaking through the strength he had spent years building. Then Eli, quiet Eli, the boy who once stopped speaking, now holding on to her like she was the only solid thing in the world. All 4 of them collapsed into each other in the front yard. No cameras, no crowd. Just a family that had finally found its way back. When they finally separated, Loretta touched their faces like she was making sure they were real. "You're here," she whispered. "You're really here." Mason nodded. "We're home." Inside the house, nothing had changed. The same creaking floors, the same worn furniture, the same old rocking chair. Eli walked straight to the mantel, and there it was, faded, yellowed, but still there. His childhood drawing, a house with a yellow roof, 4 stick figures holding hands. "My family," he whispered. Wyatt exhaled sharply. "You kept it." Loretta smiled through tears. "I kept everything." Then she reached for the mantel. Her hands trembled as she pulled down the leather notebook. She held it out to Eli. "I never opened it," she said softly. "Not once." "It's yours." Eli's hands shook as he took it. For a moment, he couldn't open it. Not because he didn't want to, because he was afraid of what it would contain. Finally, he opened it. Page after page of childhood stories. Knights, dragons, imaginary kingdoms built by a child trying to survive pain. And on the last page, a letter. Written in his mother's handwriting. Eli froze. Mason leaned closer. Wyatt stopped moving entirely. Loretta spoke gently. "She left it there for you. She said you'd find it when you were ready." Eli broke. Right there. All at once. Years of silence, loss, confusion, and love collapsing into one moment. Mason took Loretta's hands. His voice was low. "Mama, we know about the bank." Loretta stiffened. "How?" Wyatt answered. "We've been looking for you for 4 years." Eli wiped his face. "And when we finally found you, we found everything." Mason tightened his grip. "The house, the foreclosure, everything." Loretta's knees weakened. Wyatt stepped forward. "We paid it all off." Silence. "The house is yours," he said. "Forever." Loretta shook her head slowly. "No, that's not possible." Eli stepped closer. "It is." Mason added quietly, "And that's not all." Wyatt nodded. "We're starting a foundation." Eli finally spoke clearly. "The Loretta Hayes Foundation." Loretta froze. $50 million, Mason said. "To help foster kids, families, emergency housing, legal support. Everything you ever tried to do alone." Loretta's voice broke. "Why?" Wyatt stepped in. "Because you walked through an ice storm for us." Mason continued. "You fought a billionaire for us." Eli whispered. "You waited 20 years for us." Silence filled the room. Then Mason finished. "There's nothing we can do that will ever be enough, but we're going to spend the rest of our lives trying." Loretta collapsed into the rocking chair, overwhelmed, crying, laughing, breaking, healing, all at once. Outside, Redwood Creek began to wake up, and for the first time in decades, the town was about to see the truth. By midday, Redwood Creek was no longer quiet. Word spread faster than anyone could control it. 3 black SUVs, a reunion, a billionaire inheritance, a foundation worth $50 million, and Loretta Hayes at the center of it all. By afternoon, the town square was packed. Not dozens, not hundreds. Nearly everyone in Redwood Creek stood there waiting, confused, curious, uneasy. The stage had been set up quickly, as if the town itself knew history was about to be rewritten. Cameras arrived from Birmingham and Atlanta. Reporters whispered into microphones. "Something major is happening here today." No one knew how true that was. At exactly 3 o'clock, Mason stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted immediately, not because he demanded it, but because something about him made people listen. Wyatt stood slightly behind him, arms folded. Calm. Controlled. Eli stood closest to Loretta, holding her hand tightly. Mason looked out over the crowd and began. 20 years ago, his voice carried across the square. "We stood on this street as 3 orphaned boys." A murmur spread through the crowd. Our parents were gone. No home. No family willing to take us. He paused, then continued. "We were rejected 4 times. 4 foster families said no." Silence grew heavier. And when the state asked this town for help, he scanned the faces. No one stepped forward. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Mason's voice lowered. "Except one person." He turned slightly and pointed. Loretta Hayes stood beside the stage. Small, older, tired, but unshakable. She said yes, Mason said, when everyone else said no. Wyatt stepped forward. His voice was steadier, stronger. She had nothing. Broken roof. 2 jobs. Barely enough money to survive. He pointed toward Loretta. But she gave us everything. Eli stepped up last. The quiet one. The boy who once couldn't speak. Now his voice carried across the entire square. She didn't just raise us. She saved us. The crowd fell completely silent. Mason's jaw tightened. And after all of that, his tone changed, colder, sharper. This town turned on her. A ripple went through the crowd. Rumors. Lies. Whispers. Wyatt's voice cut in. People said she was dangerous, that she wanted money, that she wasn't fit to raise us. He looked directly at the front row, and you all believed it. No one moved. No one spoke. Mason stepped forward again. She lost her job because of those lies. She got sick. Cancer. A gasp moved through the crowd, and she fought it alone. Eli's voice cracked slightly. And still, she never stopped loving us. Mason's eyes scanned the crowd. Where were you? Silence answered him. He nodded slowly. I'll tell you where we were. In a house that taught us we were valuable. In a home built by a woman this town rejected. He stepped back. Wyatt took over. We didn't come back here for revenge. A pause. We came back for truth. Then he gestured toward Loretta. We paid off her house. The house you all said she might lose. Gasps spread through the square. And we built something in her name. Eli stepped forward. The Loretta Hayes Foundation. $50 million. The crowd erupted in shock. This foundation will build homes, fund foster care, support children who have nowhere to go. He looked down for a moment. Even the ones this town ignores. Murmurs spread. Uncomfortable. Shaken. Wyatt added firmly. We're rebuilding Redwood Creek, too. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Schools, housing, scholarships, jobs. For everyone. Mason raised his hand. But that's not why we're here. Silence returned instantly. He turned toward Loretta. She is why we're here. Eli's voice softened. Mama Loretta is the reason we survived. She is the reason we came back. Mason looked at the crowd again, and she deserves to be seen. At that moment, movement broke through the front of the crowd. An elderly woman stepped forward. Mildred Holloway, the same woman who had spent years whispering against Loretta. She climbed slowly onto the stage. The crowd watched in shock. She stopped in front of Loretta. Her voice trembled. I was wrong. Silence. I was cruel. Tears filled her eyes. I judged you without knowing you. She lowered herself to her knees. Can you ever forgive me? The entire square held its breath. Loretta looked at her, the woman who had once made her life harder than it needed to be. Then she stepped forward and gently lifted her back to her feet. I forgave you a long time ago, Loretta said softly, because holding on to hate never helped anyone heal. Mildred broke down crying. The crowd followed, not all at once, but one by one. Something inside Redwood Creek began to crack open. Not anger, not shame, but understanding. That evening, as the sun set over the town, things were already changing. 1 year later, Redwood Creek looked different. A new building stood in the center of town, the Hayes Family Resource Center. Bright, modern, alive. Inside, families gathered every day. Children laughed where silence used to live. Foster parents registered in record numbers. Homes were repaired. Scholarships were awarded. And hope, for the first time in a long time, had direction. Mason ran the foundation's outreach program. Wyatt built a youth sports center on the edge of town. Eli worked as a legal advocate for foster children across Alabama. And every Sunday, they came home to Loretta, to the woman who never gave up. One afternoon, a new knock came at the door. A small girl stood outside, 7 years old, clutching a worn backpack, lost, waiting. Loretta knelt in front of her, just like she once had for 3 boys on a driveway years ago. She smiled gently. I'm Loretta. This is your home now. Inside, Mason looked over and smiled. Wyatt opened the door wider. Eli set down his notebook, because some things never change, and some things shouldn't. And in Redwood Creek, Alabama, love had finally come home.